Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian, and today we're going to take a look at a pair of magazines from a couple of very unusual rifles. These are rifles from the US SPIW, or Special Purpose Infantry Weapon, sometimes called SPIW, program. This was a program that ran for a couple decades through the 1960s and 70s in particular, and it was an attempt to find an infantry firearm that had a better hit probability than a standard rifle. So there were a couple of different ideas that they looked at through the course of this program, included having multiple bullets in a single cartridge case, either 2 or 3. They looked at having flechettes, a small steel dart, or either one in a cartridge or multiple in a cluster in a cartridge. And they looked at having also flechettes and single standard bullets, but fired at very high rates of fire, where you could have multiple projectiles fired before the recoil from the shot would move the weapon. You may recognize those as having led to some of the guns like the HK G11, some small caliber, very fast firing rifles. Well, these two are from earlier rifles in the 1960s. In fact, actually, rifle is maybe not the right term, because both of these were smoothbore flechette firing guns. We'll start with this guy. So this magazine came from a 1964 Springfield designed firearm. It fired the XM-19 flechette cartridge. That was a 10.3 grain dart, so extremely light, but traveling at something like 4,400 feet per second, so very fast. The rifle had a cyclic rate of 1,700 rounds per minute and was set to fire either single shot, or then either 3-round burst or full auto. And there were a couple concerns that this brings up. So first off, with a very light cartridge and a cyclic rate that fast, it meant a 3-round burst could be fired with minimal disturbance to your aim in between shots, meaning that you basically get one sight picture, you fire 3 flechettes, and there's a pretty good chance that one of them will hit, even if all 3 don't. However, in order to do that, you need a magazine that's capable of feeding cartridges at 1,700 rounds per minute. And they looked at a couple of options. I should step back a sec. You also needed a magazine large enough to be useful. If you assume that every trigger pull is 3 rounds, all of a sudden a 30-round magazine becomes only 10 trigger pulls, and that's not sufficient. So instead, they wanted something that had, at this point in the program, the government mandated minimum was 60 rounds. And the problem was, if you made a double stack, traditional style magazine that was 60 rounds long, it would be ridiculously long. It would be just really awkward to shoot prone. And you would have to have some way to have a spring that could actually feed the last couple of rounds, had enough pressure left to feed those, but could also be loaded and not destroy the feed lips with 60 rounds, and that just wasn't feasible. So what Springfield came up with was this dual stack magazine, where each of these holds 30 rounds. There are 2 followers, 2 sets of feed lips, and it led to this really kind of complex but cool function. So the way this worked was that it would fire the front stack first. Oh, and by the way, this was a bullpup rifle, so you were able to take this kind of weird long magazine and stow it behind the pistol grip and out of the shooter's way, which is kind of handy. Anyway, you had 30 rounds up here, and it would fire these first. There was a catch in the rifle that held the rear cartridges down slightly, as long as the front stack was still full. And you've got feed lips here and a central divider here. It's kind of a complicated follower. But what's cool about this is when the 30th round was fired and this front column was expended, that would trip a catch in the rifle, which would allow the rear column to come up and the cartridges in the rear to be caught by the bolt. They didn't actually feed up out of this rear column. They fed from here. They were pushed into the front column. You can see that there are 2 little feed lips, cast or molded into the front follower here. So the rear cartridge would feed through that feed lip. This little shark fin divider would keep it on one side or the other and keep it engaged in this feed lip in the front column, and then it would feed up and into the chamber. So this was a way to get 60 rounds without having a magazine that was excessively long and without having magazine springs that were excessively heavy. Really a cool idea. So as time went on, the flechette cartridge stuck around, but the Springfield rifle kind of fell out of the trials, and it was replaced largely by a rifle from a company called AAI, Advanced Armament Inc. And they came up with, interestingly, a piston primer driven cartridge and firearm. Again, not a rifle, this was a single flechette round. It was the XM-645 cartridge, basically the same size of flechette, in this case 10.2 grains, and again firing at something over 4,000 feet per second. They initially designed this gun to use a 60 round drum magazine, drums of course being another legitimate option rather than long box magazines. But drums were a bit problematic, gave them some trouble, and by the early 1970s the government relaxed its magazine size criteria and dropped it down to requiring only 50 rounds. And at 50, it was possible to make a double stack, kind of a conventional box magazine that would be suitable. And that's what this is. This is an AAI 50 round box magazine for the XM-19 firearm. Again, rifle's not really the right term because it's not rifled. Same thing, fired 3 round bursts or full auto. And this magazine is also unusual despite being a conventional box magazine style. If I take off the floor plate, you can see there that there's nothing inside it. Well, there actually is something inside it. This has a pair of constant force metal coil springs inside there. There have been a couple of magazines that use this style more recently. I believe Ramline made one for like the 1022, which is kind of unusual. What this does is this allows you to have a constant force on the cartridges. So with a typical coil spring, you have a lot of force on the cartridges when it's all compressed down here. So the first few that feed have a ton of force acting on them, and that can have some feed issues. It also means that the stack of cartridges moves up very quickly. But once the spring has extended out and you've only got a couple of rounds left, now there's a lot less pressure. So the gun has to be able to function with varying pressure on the stack of cartridges in the magazine, and that can be tricky sometimes. This system allows you to avoid that problem. So I don't have a big stack of XM-645 flechette cartridges to load this magazine up with, so I'm just using a dowel to push the follower. But you can see you've got those 2 metal coils that are going to roll up as I let the follower up. Just like that. And that gives you a constant force on the cartridge stack. The floor plate here, which normally is required to hold the bottom end of the magazine spring in place, does nothing. In this case, these 2 rivets are where those 2 metal coils are actually riveted onto the magazine body. So they're held in place right here. The floor plate just serves to keep dirt and crap out of the bottom of the mag. There you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. Kind of esoteric and pretty nerdy subject for a specific video here, but I think these are really cool, and I have a weird interest in unusual magazines. So if I can find anything more along these lines, you'll find out about it here. Thanks for watching.